The summer sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty streets of Promise Creek, Arizona Territory, 1878. But it wasn't the heat that made Josephine Parsons hesitate at the entrance to the saloon. She'd traveled 2,000 miles from Boston to this frontier outpost, and now found herself frozen by a mixture of exhaustion and trepidation. Her uncle's letter had promised a teaching position at the newly established schoolhouse, yet upon arrival, she discovered he'd passed 3 months prior. With no job, dwindling funds, and no return ticket east, Josephine straightened her travel-worn dress and pushed through the swinging doors of the watering hole, the last place a proper lady should be seeking employment. The saloon fell silent as she entered. Tobacco smoke hung thick in the air, mingling with the pungent scent of whiskey and unwashed bodies. Men turned to stare at her, some with curiosity, others with unsettling hunger in their eyes. Josephine clutched her carpetbag tighter and approached the bar with determined steps. "I'm looking for the proprietor," she said, her voice steadier than her racing heart. The bartender, a bald man with a walrus mustache, looked her up and down. "That'd be me. Hank Simmons. What can I do for you, miss?" "I require employment. I understand you might need help serving." A burst of laughter from a nearby table interrupted her. Josephine turned to see 3 cowboys watching her with amusement. "Ain't never seen a saloon girl dressed like that before," one of them called out. Josephine felt her cheeks flush. "I am a teacher by profession, sir. Circumstances have forced me to seek alternative employment." Before the men could respond, the batwing doors creaked open again. The saloon fell even quieter than when she'd entered. Josephine turned to see a tall figure silhouetted against the bright sunlight. As he stepped inside, she found herself staring at the most imposing man she'd ever seen. He moved with the deliberate grace of a mountain lion, eyes scanning the room before settling on her. Those eyes, steel blue and piercing, seemed to look straight through her. But it was the scar that caught her attention. A jagged line that ran from just below his right eye, down his stubbled jaw, disappearing beneath his collar. It pulled slightly at one corner of his mouth, giving him a permanent half-grimace. The bartender's demeanor changed instantly. "Quinn! Didn't expect you back so soon." Quinn O'Malley, for that was his name, though Josephine wouldn't learn it until later, didn't answer immediately. His gaze lingered on her, taking in her travel-wrinkled dress, her carpetbag, and the determined set of her jaw. "Your business with Hank?" he finally asked, his voice a low rumble that sent an unexpected shiver down her spine. "I was inquiring about employment," Josephine answered, lifting her chin. Something flickered in his eyes. "You're the schoolteacher." It wasn't a question, but Josephine nodded. "I was to be. My uncle, William Hayes, passed away before I arrived." Quinn removed his hat, revealing dark hair that curled slightly at the edges. The gesture felt oddly respectful. "Bill Hayes was a good man. Sorry for your loss." "Thank you." Josephine was surprised by his gentleness. The scar and his intimidating presence had suggested otherwise. Quinn turned to Hank. "The lady won't be working here." Hank raised his eyebrows but didn't argue. The 3 cowboys who had laughed earlier suddenly found their drinks fascinating. "I beg your pardon," Josephine said, stepping forward, "but I believe that decision is mine to make." A ghost of a smile touched Quinn's lips, just the side unaffected by the scar. "Promise, Creek still needs a teacher. Schoolhouse is built. Children are waiting. But my uncle, town council hired him, position's still open." He put his hat back on. "Mrs. Wilkins has a boarding house on Cottonwood Street. Tell her Quinn sent you. First month's free for the teacher." Before Josephine could respond, he turned to leave. "Town meeting tomorrow at noon. Council will want to meet you." And with that, he was gone, leaving Josephine standing in the middle of the saloon, her mouth slightly open in astonishment. Hank chuckled. "Well, miss, seems like you've got yourself a job after all. And you just met Quinn O'Malley, the most respected and feared man in Promise Creek." "Who is he exactly?" Josephine asked, still staring at the doors. Town marshal mostly. Rancher when he needs to be. Saved this town more times than anyone cares to count. Hank leaned forward. That scar. Got it stopping a band of outlaws from burning half the town to the ground 3 years back. Never talks about it, though. Josephine found herself touching her own jaw unconsciously. And he has authority to offer me the teaching position? Mayor listens to Quinn. Everyone does. Hank shrugged. I'd take the job if I were you. Safer than serving drinks to these reprobates. An hour later, Josephine found herself settled in a modest but clean room at Mrs. Wilkins's boarding house. The older woman had welcomed her warmly after hearing Quinn's name. That man doesn't speak much, Mrs. Wilkins had said, while showing Josephine to her room. But when he does, folks listen. Been looking out for this town since he drifted in 5 years ago. As Josephine unpacked her meager belongings, her thoughts kept returning to the scarred marshal. There was something in those blue eyes, a depth of feeling, perhaps even pain, that contrasted with his hard exterior. Lying on the narrow bed, exhausted from her journey, she found herself wondering about the man who had so abruptly changed her circumstances, and what other surprises Promise Creek might hold. The next morning dawned bright and clear. Josephine rose early, determined to make a good impression at the town meeting. She wore her best dress, a navy blue cotton with white piping that had somehow survived the journey without excessive wrinkles. After a hearty breakfast with Mrs. Wilkins, she set out to explore the town before the noon meeting. Promise Creek was larger than she'd initially thought. The main street boasted a general store, a small bank, the saloon she'd visited yesterday, a barber shop, and several other establishments. Children played in the dusty street, stopping to stare curiously at her as she passed. Josephine smiled and nodded, already mentally categorizing them by age and imagining them in her classroom. Following directions from Mrs. Wilkins, she found the schoolhouse at the edge of town. It was a simple structure, freshly painted white with a small bell tower. Pushing open the unlocked door, Josephine stepped inside. Rows of wooden desks faced a larger desk at the front of the room. A blackboard covered most of the wall behind it. Shelves lined another wall, though they stood mostly empty. "It needs books," came a voice from the doorway. Josephine turned to find Quinn O'Malley watching her. He filled the doorframe, his broad shoulders nearly touching both sides. Today he wore a clean white shirt under his vest, his marshal's badge pinned to his chest. "Yes, it does," she agreed, running her finger along the empty shelf. "And slates, chalk, primers?" "Town's been collecting funds, orders already placed with suppliers in Tucson." He stepped inside, his spurs jingling softly. "Might be a few weeks." Josephine nodded. "That gives me time to develop a curriculum. How many students should I expect?" 27, ages 5 to 16. Quite a range. She moved to the teacher's desk, already feeling a sense of ownership. "I'll need to establish different lessons for varying skill levels." Quinn watched her as she explored the room, his expression unreadable. "You've taught before." "Yes, in Boston. 2 years at a girls' finishing school." She turned to face him. "I should thank you, Marshal O'Malley, for intervening yesterday. Though I'm still not entirely sure why you did." He moved further into the room, his gaze sweeping the empty desks as if seeing them filled with students. Bill Hayes wrote about his niece, said she was the smartest teacher in Boston, said Promise Creek would be lucky to have her. His eyes met hers. Seems he was right. Josephine felt heat rise to her cheeks at the unexpected compliment. "You knew my uncle well?" "Well enough." Something in his tone suggested there was more to the story, but he didn't elaborate. Instead, he checked his pocket watch. "Meeting's in an hour. Council's eager to meet you." As they walked back toward town, Josephine stole glances at Quinn. In the bright daylight, his scar was more pronounced, a stark white line against his sun-darkened skin. She wondered about the story behind it, about the pain he must have endured. "How long have you been marshal?" she asked, breaking the silence between them. 3 years. And before that? A muscle twitched in his jaw. Bit of everything. Ranched mostly. "You're not much for conversation. Are you, Marshal?" That ghost of a smile appeared again. "Not known for it." "Well, I appreciate your help, regardless of how few words you use to offer it." Josephine matched his long strides with quick steps of her own. "I must admit, I was quite desperate yesterday. I hadn't anticipated finding myself alone in a strange town with limited options." Quinn's pace slowed slightly. "This town needs a teacher more than that. Saloon needs another girl serving drinks." "And what about what I need, Marshal?" The question slipped out before she could consider its propriety. He stopped walking and turned to her, those blue eyes studying her face. "What do you need, Miss Parsons?" The directness of his gaze made her heart quicken. "A fresh start, I suppose. A place where I can be useful." Quinn nodded once, as if her answer satisfied some unspoken question. "Promise Creek can be that place." After a moment, he added, "If you let it." The town meeting passed in a blur of introductions and questions. The council, consisting of the mayor, a banker, the general store owner, and two elderly gentlemen whose roles Josephine couldn't quite determine, seemed pleased with her credentials. Quinn stood at the back of the room throughout, saying nothing but watching everything. By the end, Josephine had been officially hired as Promise Creek's school teacher with a modest but sufficient salary. Classes would begin in 2 weeks, once the supplies arrived from Tucson. In the meantime, she was to familiarize herself with the town and its residents, particularly the families with school-aged children. As the meeting dispersed, Mayor Thornton, a portly man with an impressive mustache, pulled her aside. "We're mighty pleased to have you, Miss Parsons. This town's growing, and we need educated folks like yourself." "Thank you, Mayor. I'm grateful for the opportunity." "And I see Quinn's already taken you under his wing." The mayor's eyes twinkled. "Not surprising. He was Bill Hayes's biggest supporter in bringing education to Promise Creek." This revelation surprised Josephine. "Marshal O'Malley doesn't strike me as someone particularly invested in education." The mayor chuckled. "Don't let that hard exterior fool you. Quinn's got more book learning than most folks around here, keeps to himself mostly, but he's been the backbone of this town since he ran off the Henderson gang." He gestured toward his own face. "Got that scar in the process. Never complains about it, though some of the women folks say it ruins his looks." Josephine glanced across the room where Quinn stood speaking with another man. "I don't think it ruins anything," she said softly. "No?" The mayor followed her gaze. "Well, maybe you should tell him that sometime. Might do him some good to hear it from a pretty lady like yourself." Before Josephine could respond to this rather forward suggestion, Quinn approached them. "Miss Parsons, if you're finished here, I thought you might want to see the rest of the town." "I'd like that very much, Marshal." For the next hour, Quinn guided her through Promise Creek, introducing her to shopkeepers and residents. Josephine noticed how people reacted to him with respect, certainly, but also a wariness, as if his very presence reminded them of dangers best forgotten. Yet he showed a different side to her, patient with her questions and surprisingly knowledgeable about the town's history. They ended their tour at the general store, where the owner, Mr. Jenkins, insisted on showing her the order list for the school supplies. "Should be here in 2 weeks, give or take," he said, pointing to the extensive list. Marshall made sure we ordered the best quality we could afford. Josephine raised an eyebrow at Quinn. "Did he now?" "It seems I'm further in your debt, Marshall." Quinn shifted uncomfortably. "Children deserve proper tools for learning." As they left the store, the afternoon sun was beginning to lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the street. Josephine realized she'd spent nearly the entire day in Quinn's company, yet still knew very little about the man himself. Would you join me for dinner at Mrs. Wilkins' boarding house? She asked impulsively. I'd like to hear more about the children I'll be teaching. Quinn hesitated. Mrs. Wilkins sets a good table, but I don't usually. Please, Josephine said. Consider it my thanks for all your help. Something in her expression must have swayed him. All right. Dinner that evening was a revelation. Mrs. Wilkins seemed delighted if surprised by Quinn's presence, setting an extra place at the table with barely contained excitement. Two other boarders, elderly sisters who had moved west for their health, joined them, their eyes widening at the sight of the marshal seated at their table. Once the initial awkwardness passed, conversation flowed more easily than Josephine expected. Quinn spoke more than he had all day, describing the families whose children would attend the school. He knew each child by name, their strengths and challenges, and even their interests. Little Tommy Jenkins has a gift for numbers, he said between bites of Mrs. Wilkins' excellent roast beef. But his reading lags behind. Andrew and Sarah Miller twins, they're bright but restless, need to be kept busy. You seem to know these children well, Josephine observed. Quinn shrugged. Small town. Everyone knows everyone. Mrs. Wilkins snorted softly. What the marshal isn't telling you is that he's been reading to the younger ones every Saturday at the general store for the past year, ever since their last teacher left. Quinn's ears reddened slightly. Jenkins asked for help. That's all. Josephine tried to picture this intimidating man, with his scarred face and gun at his hip, reading stories to children. The image warmed her heart in unexpected ways. What kind of stories do you read to them, Marshal? She asked. Adventure tales, mostly. Some history. He looked almost embarrassed. They seem to enjoy it. I'm sure they do, Josephine said softly. Perhaps you'd consider continuing, even after I begin teaching? Reading aloud is wonderful for children's development. Quinn met her eyes, and for a moment, Josephine saw something unguarded in his expression, gratitude, perhaps, or relief at not being mocked for this gentle side of himself. If you think it would help, he said finally. After dinner, Quinn excused himself, claiming rounds to make before turning in for the night. Josephine walked him to the door. Thank you for today, she said. You've made me feel welcome in a way I didn't expect. Quinn nodded, placing his hat on his head. This town needs you, Miss Parsons, more than you know. As he turned to leave, Josephine called after him. I hope to see you again soon, Marshal. He paused on the porch steps. I expect you will. And with that enigmatic response, he disappeared into the gathering darkness. Back inside, Mrs. Wilkins was clearing the table with a knowing smile. Never seen Quinn O'Malley take to someone so quick, she said. And I've known that man since he dragged himself half dead into town 5 years ago. Half dead? Josephine helped gather the plates. Mrs. Wilkins nodded. Shot up bad. Never said by who or why. Dr. Sanders patched him up and he just stayed. Worked odd jobs until the previous marshal was killed in a bank robbery. Quinn caught the robbers, brought them in proper-like for trial instead of gunning them down like many would have. Town council gave him the badge after that. And the scar? That came later. Henderson gang rode in 3 years back. Bunch of outlaws with a grudge against one of our ranchers. Set fire to his place, then came to town looking for more trouble. Mrs. Wilkins's voice lowered. Quinn faced them all down 6 men right in the middle of the street. Would have been fine too, except the youngest Henderson snuck around behind him with a knife. Josephine's hand went to her mouth. How terrible. Quinn still managed to disarm him, but not before the boy opened his face up good. Doctor said he was lucky not to lose the eye. Mrs. Wilkins shook her head. What's remarkable is how he handled it after. Made sure the boy couldn't have been more than 16, got sent to reform school instead of prison like the others. He doesn't seem like a man who's known much kindness in his life, Josephine observed. which makes it all the more special when he shows it to others. Mrs. Wilkins patted Josephine's hand. Just something to think about, dear. The next 2 weeks passed quickly as Josephine prepared for the start of school. True to his word, Quinn had introduced her to every family with school-age children. The parents were welcoming, if sometimes wary of her Eastern education and manners. The children were curious and excited. Many had never had formal schooling before. Josephine saw Quinn frequently during this time, though always in the context of town business. He seemed to be keeping a respectful distance, yet she often caught him watching her from across the street or through the window of his office as she passed by. There was something in his gaze that made her heart beat faster, though she tried to dismiss such foolish reactions. The Saturday before school was to begin, Josephine decided to attend Quinn's reading session at the general store. She arrived early, selecting a seat at the back, where she could observe without interfering. Children began filing in, sitting cross-legged on the floor in a semicircle at the front of the store. Their excitement was palpable. When Quinn entered, Josephine was struck by the transformation in him. He still wore his gun belt, but his badge was absent. He carried a well-worn book under one arm and greeted each child by name. When he noticed Josephine, he paused momentarily, then gave her a slight nod. "Today we're continuing with The Adventures of Tom Sawyer," he announced, settling into a chair at the front. The children cheered, clearly invested in the story already. Quinn opened the book and began to read, and Josephine found herself captivated. His deep voice brought Twain's words to life, changing subtly for different characters, rising and falling with the action of the story. The children were entranced, their faces reflecting every emotion in the tale. Most surprising was Quinn himself. The hard lines of his face softened as he read. He smiled more freely, even laughed at times. The scar that normally gave him such a forbidding appearance seemed less prominent, softened by the genuine joy he took in sharing the story. When the session ended, children reluctantly dispersed, many stopping to thank Marshal Quinn before leaving. Josephine remained seated, processing what she'd witnessed. "They're a good group," Quinn said, approaching her once the store had emptied. "Eager learners." "You've prepared them well," Josephine replied, standing. "You have quite a gift for storytelling." He ducked his head slightly, uncomfortable with the praise. "Just reading what's on the page." "No." Josephine stepped closer. "You bring it to life for them. That's a rare talent." They walked outside together into the warm afternoon. The street was busy with Saturday shoppers, and several people called greetings to both of them. Josephine was pleased to realize she already knew many of the townspeople by name. "Would you like to see something?" Quinn asked suddenly. "What is it?" "It's a bit of a ride. Could be back by sundown." Josephine considered only briefly. "I'd love to." 20 minutes later, she found herself riding beside Quinn on a horse borrowed from the livery. She was grateful for the split riding skirt she'd packed for her journey west, though she hadn't expected to use it so soon. Quinn led them out of town and into the surrounding countryside, following a narrow trail that wound through scrubby hills. "Where are we going?" Josephine asked as they crested a rise. "Place I found my first year here. Thought you might appreciate it." They rode for nearly an hour, the landscape gradually changing from arid plains to more varied terrain with increasing vegetation. Finally, Quinn guided them into a small canyon, following a bubbling creek upstream. The temperature dropped pleasantly as cottonwood trees provided shade. "Almost there," Quinn said, glancing back to ensure she was keeping up. The canyon widened suddenly into a hidden valley. Josephine gasped at the unexpected beauty. A small lake, crystal clear, reflected the blue sky above. Wildflowers dotted the grassy shores, and birds called from the trees surrounding it. "It's beautiful," she breathed as Quinn helped her dismount. "I had no idea such a place existed near Promise Creek." "Not many do." Quinn secured their horses to a tree branch. "Water comes from a spring," never runs dry, even in the worst droughts. He led her to a flat rock overlooking the lake, brushing it clean before gesturing for her to sit. From his saddlebag, he produced a small bundle wrapped in cloth bread, cheese, and dried fruit, which he offered to share. "You planned this," Josephine observed, accepting a piece of cheese. Quinn shrugged. "Thought you might want to see more than just the town before classes begin." They ate in companionable silence for a while, watching the occasional fish jump in the lake. Josephine felt more at ease than she had since leaving Boston. There was something about Quinn's quiet presence that calmed her, even as his proximity sent her pulse racing in other moments. "May I ask you something personal?" she finally said. Quinn tensed slightly but nodded. "Mrs. Wilkins told me how you got your scar. Does it still bother you?" His hand went to his jaw unconsciously. "Not physically. Doctor did good work. But otherwise?" Quinn was silent so long that Josephine thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, "People see it first, before they see anything else about me. Some are afraid, others curious. Either way, it's what they remember." The vulnerability in his admission touched Josephine deeply. "I see more than that when I look at you." His eyes met hers, questioning. "I see a man who reads to children, who knows every family in his town, who helps strangers without expectation of reward." She reached out impulsively and touched his arm. "The scar is just a part of your story, Quinn, not the whole of it." Something shifted in his expression, a softening, a lowering of defenses. "What about your story, Josephine? What brought you all the way from Boston, really?" The use of her first name startled her, but she welcomed the intimacy it suggested. "I needed a fresh start. My father arranged a marriage for me to a business associate, a man 30 years my senior with a reputation for cruelty to his first wife." She looked out across the lake. "When I refused, my father threatened to cut me off completely. My uncle's letter arrived at the perfect time." "You're brave," Quinn said simply. "Many wouldn't have made that journey alone." "I was desperate," she corrected. "But I'm beginning to think it was the best decision I've ever made." They stayed by the lake until the sun began to lower in the sky, talking more freely than they had before. Quinn told her about growing up on a small farm in Missouri, losing his parents to illness, drifting west in search of something he couldn't name. Josephine shared stories of her teaching in Boston, her love of literature, her dreams of making a difference in her students' lives. As they rode back to town in the golden light of late afternoon, Josephine felt a connection to Quinn that both excited and frightened her. She hadn't come west looking for romance indeed. She'd been running from an unwanted match. Yet there was something about this quiet, scarred man that called to her in ways she couldn't fully explain. The next day, Sunday, Josephine attended church with Mrs. Wilkins, finding most of the town already gathered. Quinn sat near the back, nodding to her as she entered. After the service, there was a community meal on the church grounds. Josephine found herself surrounded by parents asking last-minute questions about school, which would begin the following day. "Miss Parsons," called Mrs. Jenkins, the general store owner's wife, "we've saved you a seat." She patted the bench beside her at one of the long tables. Josephine thanked her and sat down, balancing her plate of food. She was midway through her meal when she noticed Quinn standing alone at the edge of the gathering, watching the proceedings with his characteristic reserve. "Marshal O'Malley doesn't join in much at these functions," Mrs. Jenkins observed, following Josephine's gaze. "Keeps to himself mostly." "Does no one invite him?" Josephine asked. Mrs. Jenkins looked embarrassed. "Well, we did at first. He always declined so politely that eventually folks stopped asking." Josephine made a decision. Excusing herself, she filled a fresh plate and carried it over to Quinn. "You look hungry," she said, offering him the food. Surprise flickered across his face. "Thank you. Would you like to join us at the table?" She gestured back to where she'd been sitting. Quinn hesitated. I should probably… Please. Josephine met his eyes. I'd consider it a personal favor. All these parents want to talk about tomorrow is whether their children need special pencils or if standard ones will do. That earned her a small smile. Wouldn't want to leave you stranded. They returned to the table together, causing a momentary lull in conversation that quickly resumed as Quinn quietly took a seat beside her. Throughout the meal, Josephine noticed him gradually relaxing, even contributing to the discussion occasionally. Several people seemed surprised but pleased by his presence. As the gathering dispersed, Quinn walked Josephine back toward her boarding house. The late summer evening was warm. The streets quiet with most people still at the church grounds. Thank you, Quinn said suddenly. For what? Including me today. His voice was low. It's been a while since I sat at a table like that. Why do you keep yourself apart? Josephine asked gently. Quinn was quiet for several steps. Habit, I suppose. Started after this. He touched his scar. Easier to keep distance than see people's reactions. Not everyone is put off by it. Aren't they? They had reached the boarding house gate. Josephine turned to face him fully, gathering her courage. I'm certainly not. Before she could lose her nerve, she reached up and gently traced the line of his scar with her fingertips. Quinn went completely still, his eyes widening. You're still handsome, she whispered, scar and all. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. Quinn stared at her, his blue eyes intense with unspoken emotion. Josephine's heart pounded so loudly she was certain he must hear it. Then he stepped back, breaking the spell. You should rest. Big day tomorrow. Josephine lowered her hand, disappointment washing through her. Yes, of course. Good night, Marshal. Good night, Miss Parsons. He tipped his hat and turned away, his stride long and purposeful as he disappeared down the darkening street. Inside, Josephine leaned against the closed door, her fingers still tingling from the touch of his skin. Had she been too forward? Too improper? The look in his eyes had suggested her touch wasn't unwelcome, yet he'd withdrawn so quickly. Mrs. Wilkins appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. Everything all right, dear? You look flushed. Yes, just. Excited about tomorrow, I suppose. The older woman nodded sagely. First day of school is always exciting, though I suspect that's not the only thing causing those pink cheeks. Josephine didn't respond, but her blush deepened. Quinn O'Malley is a good man, Mrs. Wilkins said gently. But he's known hardship I can't even imagine. Might take time for him to believe he deserves happiness. I never said anything about… You didn't have to, dear. Mrs. Wilkins patted her arm. Just be patient with him. Some wounds take longer to heal than others, and not all of them leave visible scars. The first day of school arrived with perfect weather and 25 excited children waiting at the schoolhouse door when Josephine arrived. She was pleased to see the promised supplies had been delivered: books, slates, chalk, paper, and various other materials were neatly stacked on her desk. The day passed in a whirlwind of introductions, assessments, and establishing routines. As Quinn had mentioned, the children's abilities varied widely, requiring Josephine to create groupings based on skill rather than age. By the time the final bell rang, she was exhausted but exhilarated. As the children filed out, Josephine noticed Quinn standing across the street, watching. When the last child had gone, he approached the schoolhouse, removing his hat as he entered. Successful first day? He asked. Josephine smiled, gathering papers on her desk. Very much so. The children are eager to learn. Tommy Jenkins is indeed a mathematical prodigy. He completed problems I'd planned for next month. Quinn nodded, seemingly pleased by this confirmation of his assessment. He glanced around the room, noting the changes she'd already made: colorful maps on the walls, books arranged by subject, students' names written in careful script on the blackboard. "You've made it yours already," he observed. "It's a wonderful space. Thank you again for ensuring I had proper supplies." Quinn stepped further into the room, setting his hat on one of the student desks. He seemed to be gathering his thoughts, or perhaps his courage. "About last night," he began. Josephine tensed. "I apologize if I was too forward." "No," he interrupted. I'm not good with words, Josephine. Or feelings." He ran a hand through his dark hair. "What you said. What you did. No one's touched me like that since." He trailed off, frustration evident in his expression. Josephine waited, giving him time to find the words he needed. "I've been alone a long time," he finally continued. "Thought it was better that way. Safer. For everyone." His eyes met hers. "Then you stepped into that saloon and everything changed." Josephine's heart quickened. Changed how? Quinn moved closer, stopping just in front of her desk. "I can't stop thinking about you. Your kindness, your courage, the way you look at me like you see past everything else." "I do see you, Quinn," she said softly. "I see a good man who deserves happiness as much as anyone." He circled the desk slowly, giving her time to step away if she wished. When she remained in place, he reached out tentatively, his rough fingers brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I'm not an educated man like you," he said. "Don't have fancy words or manners." "I don't want fancy words." Josephine's voice was barely above a whisper. "I just want honesty." "Honestly?" His hand cupped her cheek. "I think I'm falling in love with you, Josephine Parsons. And it terrifies me." Joy bloomed in her chest. "Being afraid doesn't mean you shouldn't try." "Is that so?" A small smile tugged at his lips. "I believe it is." Josephine placed her hand over his, leaning slightly into his touch. "And honestly, Quinn O'Malley, I think I'm falling in love with you too." His eyes darkened with emotion. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he lowered his head until their lips met in a tender, questioning kiss. Josephine responded with gentle pressure, her hand moving to his shoulder to steady herself. When they parted, Quinn rested his forehead against hers. "I never expected this," he murmured. "Neither did I." Josephine smiled. "But I'm very glad it happened." A throat cleared from the doorway. They sprang apart to find Mayor Thornton standing there, his expression a mixture of amusement and embarrassment. "Pardon the interruption," he said, trying to suppress a grin. "Just came to see how our new teacher's first day went." Josephine straightened her dress, her face burning. "Very well. Thank you, Mayor." "Excellent, excellent." The mayor's eyes twinkled. "And I see our marshal is being hospitable." Quinn had recovered his composure more quickly. "Just checking that Miss Parsons had everything she needed." "I'm sure you were." The mayor cleared his throat again. "Well, I'll leave you to it. Town council meeting tomorrow, Quinn. Don't forget." After he left, Josephine covered her face with her hands. That was mortifying. Quinn chuckled, the sound warm and surprisingly youthful. "Thornton's harmless. Though I expect this will be all over town by supper." "Oh no." Josephine peeked through her fingers. "What will people think?" "That the marshal and the school teacher make a fine match." Quinn took her hands, gently pulling them from her face. "If you're concerned about your reputation—" "I'm not," she interrupted. This is all happening so quickly." Quinn nodded, his expression serious. "We can slow down. Take time to know each other properly." Josephine considered this. "Yes, I think that would be wise. Though I don't regret what just happened." "Neither do I." He lifted her hand to his lips, placing a kiss on her knuckles. "May I call on you properly? Perhaps dinner at the hotel restaurant tomorrow evening? I'd like that very much." As promised, news of their kiss traveled quickly through Promise Creek. By the next morning, Josephine received knowing looks from parents dropping off their children, though no one commented directly. The children themselves were blissfully oblivious, more concerned with their lessons than adult matters. That evening, Quinn arrived at the boarding house precisely at 6, wearing a clean shirt and vest, his hair neatly combed. He presented Josephine with a small bunch of wildflowers, likely gathered from near the hidden lake they had visited. "These are lovely," she said, inhaling their sweet scent. "Thank you." Mrs. Wilkins appeared with a vase. "I'll put these in water for you, dear. You two enjoy your evening." Dinner at the hotel restaurant was a new experience for Josephine. The establishment was the finest in Promise Creek, which wasn't saying much compared to Boston's restaurants, but the food was well prepared and the atmosphere pleasant. What made the evening special was watching Quinn navigate this more formal setting. He was clearly uncomfortable at times, but determined to make the evening special for her. "How did you learn to read so well?" Josephine asked as they enjoyed their dessert apple pie with fresh cream. "You mentioned growing up on a farm. Did you attend school regularly?" Quinn shook his head. "Mother taught me basics. After she passed, I worked for a lawyer in town for a spell. Let me use his library evenings if I finished my chores. Taught myself mostly." "That's remarkable. Self-education requires discipline and genuine love of learning." "Just wanted something better." His eyes grew distant. "Father could barely write his name. Got cheated by men with education more than once." Josephine reached across the table, touching his hand. "Is that why you're so supportive of the school? To prevent others from being taken advantage of?" "Partly." Quinn turned his hand to capture hers. "Knowledge gives people choices. Without it, you take what's offered or go without. Like a young woman accepting an arranged marriage because she has no means to support herself otherwise," Josephine observed. Quinn's eyes met hers. "Or a scarred man thinking loneliness is all he deserves." The weeks that followed established a rhythm to their courtship. Quinn called on Josephine regularly, taking her to dinner or for rides in the countryside. On Saturdays, after his reading sessions with the children, they often picnicked by the hidden lake that had become their special place. Sometimes they talked for hours, other times they sat in comfortable silence, simply enjoying each other's presence. Josephine flourished as Promise Creek's teacher. The children adored her, and their parents appreciated her dedication. She established adult education classes 2 evenings a week, teaching reading and basic mathematics to those who had never had the opportunity to learn. Quinn attended these sessions not as a student but as a quiet supporter, sometimes helping others who struggled. As autumn approached, bringing cooler temperatures and spectacular sunsets, Josephine realized she had found something in Promise Creek she never expected: a sense of belonging. She had friends now, real friends, who valued her for herself, not her family's social standing. She had purpose in her teaching. And she had Quinn, whose quiet strength and genuine goodness had captured her heart completely. One crisp Saturday in late September, they rode to their lake as usual. The foliage had begun to turn, painting the surrounding hills with splashes of gold and crimson. Quinn seemed unusually quiet, even for him, his brow furrowed in thought. "Is something troubling you?" Josephine asked as they sat on their usual rock overlooking the water. Quinn took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "Been thinking a lot lately, about the future." "Oh?" Josephine's heart skipped a beat. "I own land north of town, 100 acres with good water. Built a cabin there a few years back." He paused, seeming to gather his courage. "It's not fancy, simple place, but there's room to expand. Could be a proper home someday." Josephine squeezed his hand encouragingly. "It sounds wonderful." Quinn reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object, keeping it enclosed in his fist. "My mother's," he explained, opening his hand to reveal a simple gold band with a small pearl. "Only thing of value I have from before." Josephine's breath caught as she realized what was happening. "I love you, Josephine," Quinn said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "Never thought I'd say those words to anyone. Never thought I'd have the right. But you changed everything when you touched my scar and saw past it to the man beneath." Tears welled in Josephine's eyes. "Quinn, let me finish," he said gently. "I know I'm not the man your father would have chosen. Don't have wealth or education or social standing. But I promise you this. I'll spend every day making sure you never regret choosing me. I'll protect you, provide for you, stand by you no matter what comes." He held the ring between them. "Josephine Parsons, will you marry me?" "Yes," she answered without hesitation. "Yes, Quinn, I will marry you." His face transformed with joy as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. Quinn cupped her face in his hands and kissed her with a tenderness that made her heart ache. When they parted, Josephine traced the line of his scar with her fingertips, as she had that first night. "You know, I think I fell in love with you the moment I saw you walk into that saloon. Scar and all." Quinn turned his head to kiss her palm. "And I fell in love with you when you stood your ground and told me the decision about where to work was yours to make." Josephine laughed. "We're quite a pair, aren't we? The scarred marshal and the runaway teacher. Wouldn't have it any other way." Quinn pulled her close, his arms strong around her. "Promise Creek brought us together. Seems right we make our life here." "Speaking of which," Josephine said, "what about my teaching position? I don't want to give it up." "Wouldn't ask you to. Town needs you as much as I do." Quinn smiled. "Besides, my land's not far. Can ride in together most days." They were married 2 weeks later in Promise Creek's small church, with the entire town in attendance. Mrs. Wilkins cried happily throughout the ceremony. Mayor Thornton performed the service, beaming with satisfaction at the union he claimed partial credit for encouraging. Josephine wore a simple white dress ordered from Tucson, with wildflowers in her hair gathered from their special lake. Quinn, unrecognizable to many in his new suit, couldn't take his eyes off her. When the mayor pronounced them husband and wife, Quinn kissed her with such gentle reverence that several women in the congregation dabbed at their eyes. The celebration afterward lasted well into the evening, with music, dancing, and more food than Josephine had ever seen in one place. As twilight descended, Quinn led her away from the festivities toward a waiting wagon. "Ready to see your new home, Mrs. O'Malley?" he asked, the name still new and wonderful on his lips. "More than ready, Mr. O'Malley," she replied, accepting his help into the wagon. Their cabin was indeed simple but solidly built and spotlessly clean. Quinn had clearly been preparing for this day, adding small touches he thought she might appreciate: curtains at the windows, a bookshelf filled with volumes both familiar and new, a comfortable rocking chair beside the fireplace. "It's perfect," Josephine said, turning in a slow circle to take it all in. "It's just a beginning," Quinn replied, pulling her into his arms. "We'll build more as we need it." Later that night, as they lay together in the quiet darkness, Josephine traced the line of Quinn's scar in what had become a familiar gesture of affection. "Does it still bother you?" she asked softly. "What people see when they look at you?" Quinn caught her hand and kissed it. "Not anymore. You taught me to see myself differently." "How so?" "You saw strength where I saw damage, courage instead of pain." His voice deepened with emotion. "You made me believe I deserved happiness." "You do," Josephine whispered, kissing him tenderly. "We both do." The years that followed proved her right. Josephine continued teaching at Promise Creek School, watching her students grow and flourish under her guidance. Quinn remained marshal for a time before eventually passing the badge to a younger man so he could focus on expanding their ranch. Their family grew with the arrival of a daughter, Sarah, followed 2 years later by a son they named William, after Josephine's uncle. Both children inherited their father's blue eyes and their mother's love of learning. Quinn read to them every night, just as he had once read to the children of Promise Creek. The town itself prospered and grew, eventually adding a proper hotel, a bank, and even a small library that Josephine helped establish. Through all the changes, Quinn and Josephine remained its heart, the scarred marshal who found redemption, and the Eastern schoolteacher who found her true home. On their 10th anniversary, Quinn took Josephine back to their special lake. They sat on the same rock where he had proposed, watching their children play along the shoreline. "Any regrets?" Quinn asked, his arm around her shoulders. Josephine leaned into him, feeling the familiar strength of his body against hers. "Not one." "You?" Quinn smiled, the scar on his jaw now just another beloved feature of the face she woke up to each morning. "Only that I wasted so much time believing I wasn't worthy of you." "We have all the time we need now," Josephine said, reaching up to trace the line that had first drawn her to him. "And you're still handsome, Quinn O'Malley. More so every day." He kissed her then, with the same tenderness as their first kiss in the schoolhouse all those years ago. And in that moment, surrounded by the family they had created together, they both knew that some scars weren't meant to be erased, only transformed by love into something beautiful.